How many times does God have to take something precious from me before he is satisfied? No, perhaps God did not exist from the beginning. My name is Charlotte Moore. After graduating from a junior college, I was working as a bank employee. My parents died when I was young, so I've been living with my only sister, Mia. When it comes to sisters, the older sister is said to be more stable. But Mia had always been more beautiful and strong than me. You are beautiful, so you should pay more attention to your appearance. Mia was adorable when she said that to me while pouting. Don't worry about me. Look, Violet is calling you. It was a peaceful Saturday afternoon. I was in the park with Mia when I saw her daughter waving at us from a distance. Ah, Violet, don't touch those pill bugs. I couldn't stop laughing at the sight of Mia running toward her, screaming. Mia worked in the apparel industry and married a man she met on the job. It was a Saturday ritual for me and Violet to hang out at the park after Mia's husband left for work. Speaking of which, are you available the Saturday following this one? Violet's birthday is coming up. Of course, yeah, I didn't make any plans for that day. Perfect. Violet is really looking forward to having you there. I'm sorry to bother you on your precious day off. Mia apologized, looking up at me. But we always spend time together, don't we? I laughed. But if you have a date or something, you can prioritize that. You know what I'm saying, right? Mia moved her face closer to mine. There's actually someone I'd like to introduce you to. Mia spoke to me. Yeah, I replied with a wry smile. Charlotte, over here! I loved Violet, who pulled my hand and led me to the sandbox. For me, it was a tranquil and significant day off. I was confident that these days would go on indefinitely. It was the following weekend that this routine was shattered. It was a week before Violet's birthday party. Why? I got a call and hurried to the hospital morgue. Mia and her husband Andrew were already cold and had a white towel covering their faces when I arrived. The time of death was 2:37 p.m., and the cause of death was... By my side, the doctor was speaking, but I was unable to hear him. All I knew was that Violet's parents were no longer with us. On that day, Mia and Andrew had taken a day off to go shopping. They were buying a birthday present for Violet, and also a present for me because I had been taking care of her. A truck driven by a dozing driver crashed into their car on the way home. That's what the police explained to me. Charlotte. I heard a faint voice nearby and suddenly came to myself and looked to the side. Violet was standing there with her favorite stuffed animal. Mom and Dad, why don't they wake up? I've been calling to them since a while ago, but they've been asleep. Violet's lips were pale blue as she mumbled anxiously. I could only stand there holding Violet's small hand. Only relatives attended the funeral, which was held quietly. The relatives were left in shock at the news of the death of these young two. Nobody said anything throughout the somber and sad ceremony. Both Mia and Andrew had lost their parents early, so I was the closest relative. When it came to the topic of who would look after Violet, I offered to do so without hesitation. There was a sigh of relief in the air as my relatives seemed to be waiting for me to say that. Children this age are actually sensitive to many things. I was acutely aware of this, having lost both of my parents at a young age. I was happy that the decision had been taken before the discussion began. Violet, your mom and dad are going to sleep for a while. I crouched down to make eye contact with Violet. It's just for a little while. No, you won't be able to talk to them for a long while. But I will always be by your side during that time. She was dressed in black, which was not appropriate for a child of her age. Clutching a stuffed animal, Violet gave a small nod. Later, we received the belongings from the police. In Mia and Andrew's car was a set of Violet's favorite character toys. There was also a small white box from a well-known cosmetics brand. When I opened it, I discovered lipstick in a vivid color I would never have chosen for myself. "You are so pretty. You should be more confident." I imagined Mia handing me this with a smile. I could almost hear her happy voice as she handed me the gift. After making sure Violet went to bed that night, for the first time since Mia and her husband died, I walked outdoors and cried aloud. I cried and cried, but the tears never stopped. Violet was acting a bit awkwardly when she first started to live with me, but she had always liked me and started laughing more and more. She was a very smart and independent child, but the shock of losing her parents suddenly never went away, I guess. She would occasionally start crying in the middle of the night or in the evening. All I could do when this happened was hold Violet in my arms till she calmed down. She must have been worried about switching daycare centers, but she adapted to the rapidly changing environment. Seeing her like this strengthened my desire to help her. However, I had no experience in marriage or child rearing. It was not easy for me to work while raising a young child. I notified my supervisor of my condition, and he offered to lower my workload. However, I refused, stating that I could not cause any more disruption in an already overworked office. I picked up Violet from daycare and returned home, holding her hand. "Violet, shall we make curry today?" "Curry? Yes." She smiled at me. My exhaustion from work was instantly relieved by seeing her grin. Between the love that welled up in my heart and the sensation of sorrow that I had lost Mia, I tried to maintain my mental and physical health. This equilibrium was thrown off one day during the rainy season, half a year after I moved in with Violet. "Are you all right, Charlotte? You look very pale." A colleague called out to me, and I suddenly returned my attention to the documents in my hand. "I'm fine, I'm sorry. I was a little distracted." I checked the documents in a hurry and turned back to the computer. I had been feeling heavy in my mind since the morning, and I had not been able to complete any work. "Maybe you should go to the hospital." When my colleague suggested that, "It's okay." I smiled and concentrated on my work. During that hectic season, I couldn't afford to cause any problems. The time for Violet's pickup was approaching, and I hurried to gather my belongings. I felt a little shaky on my feet, but I convinced myself it was all in my head and dashed to the childcare center. I apologized for being a little late, and the teacher pointed out how pale I looked. I didn't realize that I looked that pale. And I was thinking of going to the hospital when I finished my responsibilities. Thinking about this, I smiled at Violet, who hugged me and held my hand. "It's raining so hard, isn't it?" "Yeah, oh, I found a frog today." We were walking home having such a trivial talk. As we were approaching a pedestrian crossing, I saw a truck coming toward us. "Watch out!" I quickly pulled Violet's hand. Violet fell on her bottom because she couldn't resist the force of my hand. "Why did you run in front of the truck? What would you do if you get hit by the truck?" I was terrified and clutched Violet in my arms. "Charlotte, are you okay?" I looked up in surprise at Violet's anxious muttering. I looked in front of me and saw that the traffic light was green. The truck had stopped normally. Because of my suspicious behavior, the truck driver and the people surrounding me were staring at me suspiciously. Violet peeked at me worriedly. "Charlotte?" Violet's voice was fading as she spoke to me. I heard someone yelling, but I slumped and lost consciousness. When I regained consciousness again, I was lying in a hospital bed. "Hey, can you hear me?" I tried to rise up when I heard a soft female voice, but I had a severe headache. "I'll call the doctor now. Please lie down." I lay down again after the nurse restrained me. When I looked at the clock, it was around 9:00 p.m. I wondered how long I had been asleep. "Please wait a moment." As I watched the nurse check the IV and leave the room, I looked over to Violet, who was asleep at my feet. On Violet's cheeks, I could see traces of tears. I'm sure she must have been very anxious. I felt sorry for her. Just when I was about to be crushed by guilt, I heard a knock at my door.
"Excuse me."
A young doctor came in. I tried to get up, but he told me to keep lying, so I did.
"I think you have collapsed, probably due to overwork and high fever. I don't believe a thorough examination is necessary, but, just in case, would you like to schedule another appointment?"
I gently declined the detailed examination because there were so many things that came to me.
"We are still administering you an IV. You can stay at the hospital for a night, or would you like to go home?"
The doctor's eyes showed a hint of concern, and I hesitated for a moment. At that moment, I saw Violet move at my feet. "Violet?" I called out to her, and she jumped up as if surprised. "Charlotte!" Violet looked a little sleepy, but she looked at me and spoke clearly. "I'm sorry I surprised you. Violet, it's all right now." My head was still hurting badly, but I smiled at Violet, hoping to alleviate her worries. Violet appeared to be fighting back tears for a minute before hugging my feet and nuzzling her face. I couldn't believe I made such a little girl care about me. My heart ached with apology. At that moment,
"Are you Violet?"
Suddenly the doctor spoke up. Violet looked up at the voice and stared at him. "Oh, it's you, Samuel." After that, I heard from the doctor, from Samuel Taylor, the story. Samuel turned out to be a neighbor of my sister's former apartment. The hospital where I was sent was a local general clinic, and Samuel worked there as a doctor.
"Violet always greeted me pleasantly. Both Mia and Andrew always smiled at me, and I enjoyed seeing them every day."
Violet was also attached to Samuel, so he even had dinner together at Mia's house. I almost burst into tears when I heard Mia and her family's story. After ensuring that Violet had dozed off again, I informed Samuel of our current situation.
"Since they disappeared suddenly, I was concerned about it. I had no idea."
Samuel also looked distressed. I ended up staying in the hospital overnight that day. This was due to Samuel's strong recommendation, as he was concerned about my health condition. I looked at Violet, who was sleeping in the bed Samuel had prepared for me in the same room. "Violet, I'm really sorry." Looking at Violet's innocent sleeping face, I felt a twinge in the back of my nose. I had to protect her at all costs. I swore to myself. I called the office the next morning and was told to take the rest of the week off. I decided to take my boss at his word. My fever had subsided, so I chose to spend the day at home with Violet after I was released from the hospital that day. Violet was looking forward to a daycare field trip the next day, so I packed her lunch and sent her off. I decided to stay home and relax and prepare for the next week. But I decided to go out for a short bit to change things up. I went to the park where I used to play with Mia and Violet. On weekdays, the park was deserted, and the mood was dramatically different from that of the park on Saturdays when I used to visit. I sat on the bench Mia and I used to sit on, staring blankly at the playground equipment. The image of Violet frolicking on the swings and Mia pushing her back flashed through my mind. Tears were building up in my eyes before I knew it. I was about to wipe my uncontrollable tears with my sleeve when,
"Charlotte?"
I was startled by a familiar voice and turned around. There stood Samuel, dressed in plain clothes.
"I live nearby, so I often come here on my days off."
I was too surprised to speak.
"I'm sorry for calling out to you all of a sudden."
With that, he offered me a plastic bottle he was holding. I hesitated for a second, but thankfully accepted it and moved to the far end of the bench so he could sit more comfortably.
"Do you come here often?"
Yes, I often came here with my sister and Violet. With those words, I began to talk quietly. Maybe it was because Samuel knew Mia and Violet so well, even though I hardly knew him. We naturally had a lot to talk about. I realized that we were talking not only about Mia and Violet, but also about myself. Perhaps it was because I was exhausted both mentally and physically. I rarely talked about myself to others, but for some reason I was able to talk honestly to Samuel. I could see him looking at me with a complicated expression. "I'm sorry for making you listen to all this weird stuff."
"No, I'm rather glad you told me about it."
He looked at me.
"I was really happy to meet you here today."
Samuel smiled a little and then looked at me with serious eyes. Then he inhaled a little as if he was nervous.
"If you don't mind, will you allow me to support Violet?"
Involuntarily, my eyes widened at his unbelievable notion.
"Of course, I would not do anything that would bother you or Violet. But Mia and Andrew treated me very well too. And I love Violet as well, so I have always wanted to help her in any way I can."
Samuel's expression showed how much he cared about Violet and my sister and her husband. However, I was unable to respond immediately, so Samuel provided me with his contact information.
"Maybe we can meet up here next Saturday if you like."
He smiled shyly at me. His consideration of my feelings made my heart flutter. I shook his hand and parted from Samuel. Violet's eyes brightened up when I picked her up from daycare and informed her I had met Samuel. "Why don't we hang out with Samuel?" Violet nodded her head in happiness. On the appointed day, when Violet found Samuel, she ran to him at once. Seeing Samuel use the might of an adult man to play with Violet as much as he can, I guessed that he must have been playing with her like this before. I felt a little ashamed of myself for initially doubting him. Samuel, who had been a gentleman from the beginning, never came to my house. We played in the park, ate out, or went on picnics with me making lunches. He was always caring for Violet and me. It was not surprising that I gradually became attracted to Samuel. We became closer and closer, and before I knew it, we were eating dinner at home together. Then one day, we all went to an amusement park together, and then, in the evening, Violet was walking very happily, holding hands between me and Samuel. "Samuel, do you want to stay over at my house after dinner today?" Violet's unexpected idea caught me off guard. "Violet, what are you saying?" I was barely able to speak, surprised. "Because Samuel always returns home after dinner, so I thought it would be nice if we could all sleep together." Violet murmured a little sadly.
"Violet."
After a little pause, Samuel knelt in front of Violet, his gaze fixated on her.
"Violet, do you love Charlotte?"
"Yeah, I love her." Violet smiled happily.
"Okay, I love her too."
This time, his abrupt comments caught me off guard.
"I don't want Charlotte to hate me. What do you say for today? I'll only have dinner with you. And next time, if Charlotte says yes, can I stay over?"
"Okay, sure." I was relieved it was dusk at the time. They couldn't see how much I blushed. "If Charlotte says yes, Samuel, will you be friends with Charlotte forever and ever?" Violet's direct remarks ultimately made me want to get in if there was a hole. Samuel stood up and looked at me mischievously, but very seriously.
"I want us to be friends forever and ever. Charlotte, will you be good friends with me?"
I was barely able to say, "Yes." That was all I could say. Violet was happily running around at our feet. Violet then informed me that Mia had planned to introduce me to Samuel. "There's actually someone I'd like to introduce you to." So, she was referring to Samuel. I was surprised, and Violet said, "I knew you two were destined to be together." Violet's adorable and mawkish tone made me think of Mia. I couldn't help but feel that my connection with Samuel was a gift from Mia. The sadness of losing them will never heal. Still, looking ahead and living to safeguard Violet's happiness will undoubtedly be the finest approach to putting Mia and Andrew at peace. Someday in the distant future, I'll run upon Mia, who will be beaming brightly. I'd like to tell her about Violet's life, which is full of cheerful smiles.